Ooh. There we go. Good evening, everybody. How are y'all doing today? How many chapters do we have left? 2, 3, 4. Some of these are really short. Hi, everyone. I hope you all are having a fantastic evening wherever you are. Happy Monday. I hope your weekend was nice. Everything's good. Everything's good, Ishmael. How are you? How's the wife? How's the kids? Real quick, can everybody hear me? Can you hear me all right? Just give me like a thumbs up or hearts or something. All right. So for anybody who is new, welcome. You have stumbled upon a book reading for this evening. We are reading, Wolfcry, obviously, but this is simply one part in a 5-part series. We have one final book left of this particular series before we move on to something new. But if you have missed any of the previous readings of this book, or if you've missed the readings of, some of the other books in the series, you can find them on my YouTube channel. So by all means, hop onto my bio here in TikTok and then follow the link to YouTube and subscribe. So that way you get notifications whenever I upload a new video. So I also do my main TikTok content on my YouTube, so I just upload everything there, but also it's the book readings on TikTok that I then upload to YouTube. So if you're seeing this on YouTube, good evening or good morning or hello. I know I've gone back and I've looked at some of my other videos in the past, and I don't talk to my YouTube audience that much in these videos because I'm so focused on doing this stuff live on TikTok. So if you see these exclusively on YouTube, hello, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for subscribing if you have. I'm sorry that I haven't engaged with you that much. That's going to be one of my New Year's resolutions, is to engage not only with my TikTok following, but also with the people who follow me on YouTube. It's only fair. So if you guys are going to support me on that channel, I at least owe you guys my time on that platform as well. So, so for anyone who's new, we usually wait until about 5 after to get started with our readings, and we'll do about an hour, depending on how tired my eyes get or how tired my voice gets sometimes. But we are this. That's it. That's all we have left of this book. I mean, as you can see, it's not a thick book. This series is a nice series. If you, hello, Miss Deborah, happy Monday. If you are not a big reader and you want to try and get into reading, there are tons of series that are just like these skinny little books that you can just pick up and light read whenever you've got a free moment. Like, none of this is like Lord of the Rings level stuff. So if you're looking for a nice, easy way to like hop back into reading, find like little series like this where you're not dedicating a ton of time per book, really. So I think if I pace myself right, we will probably end this book tonight, I think. I might be getting a little ambitious, but we'll see. Some of these chapters are very, very short, so we'll see how it goes. But check my computer real quick. And And I am probably going to sniffle a little bit. I just had dinner. I made chili, so it was a little bit spicier than I had thought it was going to be. So if I sniffle, I'm not sick. I'm just recovering from my chili. That's another thing I'm thinking about doing for my YouTube is getting on the cooking episode bandwagon and pretty much uploading cooking videos if I've got time for it this year. We'll see how that goes though. All right, so we're at 8:05. All right, so go ahead, get comfy, guys. Grab your favorite drink, get into your jammies, and let's just get into this, shall we? Chapter 18 for anybody who is following along with their own book, if you happen to have your own book. After the conversation with Sive, I walked with Nasias along the outskirts of Wyvern's Court toward the Dancer's Nest. I needed to show my people that I was home, and I wanted to check on Urban. Nasias had been right to accuse me of panicking after the conversation with my parents. The interlude with Hai and the more rational discussion with Sive and Prentice had calmed me, and now I needed to decide my path. The Vahamil are our allies, and though there is obviously a power struggle going on between them and the Frektain, neither pack seems a likely suspect. That leaves someone from Wyvern's Court. I hate thinking of my own people in that light, but I know I must. Or the Falcons. I know you feel that the Falcons aren't behind this, but from what you've said, they seem to have a powerful motive to remove me. Do you really trust them? Nasias let out a short laugh. Trust? Absolutely not. The Falcon's god Anmeek might not be evil, but he supposedly gave this world manipulation and deceit. If Darian had said she wanted to help me because she felt it was the right thing to do, it would have been a lie. She was in love with your uncle Anjay Cobriana. Their child, Hai, is in Wyvern's Court, and Darian hates the Empress and Araceli for supporting the war. She wants to fight them, and that means she will do everything in her power to see you on the throne of Wyvern's Court. Like I said before, the royal house has agreed to give me a chance to protect your child, and I do not think they will go back on that agreement. If they did, I believe they would find a more effective means of doing it. I've been wrong about them before, but if I was in this case, Darian would let me know, simply because she is that vindictive. What about Hai? She's been here for months now and has rarely spoken to me. When she has, it has usually been incoherent or outright condescending. Now she has offered to help me at the last 2 times I have seen her. The first time had been right before I was abducted. Hai makes no attempt to hide her loyalty to Empress Yarza. Why does she claim to want to help me? I don't know, Nasias admitted, but she wouldn't do anything she thought would hurt you. Why not? I don't believe for a moment that she is loyal to me. The only monarchy Hai is loyal to is the one on Anmeek, the one of which I am third in line to the throne. He cringed. I like to believe that Hai's affection toward me is more than loyalty and magic, but even if it is, I doubt she would hesitate to turn on someone she loved if her empress wished it. What I know is that the only thing that allowed Hai to wake and allows her to survive in our world is her tie to me. Betraying you would be betraying me, and it would destroy her. I needed her help desperately. There was little I could do until I knew whether I had my wings. I had been straddling the line between heir and queen for years. Maybe my parents were right in saying that we had reached a point where my hesitation could hurt my people. I needed only to decide. I know I need to be here, I said to Nasias with a sigh as I thought about the days I had spent in the Obsidian Guild. Simpler days, without these hard decisions. I am Arami, and I am heir to the Tu'ulithea, and I won't just forsake that. But it is so awful. But is it so awful that I was tempted? I danced Nasias, and it was so pure. I wasn't queen to be. I wasn't competing and being backed into a corner by decisions I am not ready to make. And there was this incredible, perfect moment. I thought about the instant after the the Han Lamelos. It had seemed as if anything was possible. It had felt like... I shook my head. I am the leader of Wyvern's court, and if I have to declare a mate, I will. I made this pledge without any idea as how I would fulfill it. Nasias started to protest, but I cut him off with emotion. I am terrified that what happened to Urban is just the beginning, that anyone I pick will be in even more danger. But what I've done so far hasn't worked. People believed that I had abdicated, even members of my own guard. The longer I procrastinate, the longer I wait to tie myself to Wyvern's court, the more speculation and doubt will grow. Do you have anyone in mind? He asked, neither challenging nor agreeing with me. I was grateful for his calm support. No, I answered. Someone known by both groups. A serpient who won't be lost without constant company, who won't panic if I ask for a moment of privacy, or an avian willing to learn to dance, and who won't be challenged by... I let out a frustrated cry. In short, a man who doesn't mind abandoning the culture that raised him, and is submissive enough to let me drag him about. That doesn't exactly sound like a good basis for a loving, equal partnership, does it? And what kind of king could such a man make? Nasias shook his head, but before he could say more, he tensed. His hand moved to rest on the knife at his waist as he took a step past me, towards something he had heard that I had not. A moment later, we glimpsed a flash of white. Nasias unsheathed his blade and moved in front of me. If I meant harm, I would not be foolish enough to show myself to a loyal falcon. The voice was familiar to me. I put my hand on Nasias' arm to draw him back as the leader of the Obsidian Guild stepped forward. Siasi Nitil. Siankare Obsidian, I said. Nasias, it's all right. Nasias' expression was doubtful, but he stepped back a little. Don't worry, Falcon. I do not plan to stay long. I am simply escorting a friend. He looked behind himself and called, It's all right, dear. Tentatively, another figure emerged from the woods. My breath left me in a rush when I recognized her. Betia! I pulled her into my arms as gratitude overwhelmed me, washing away the dread in the pit of my stomach. Betia was still in human form. She hadn't gone back to her wolf. She balked when I tried to draw her into the clearing, and I spoke quickly. Betia, this is Nasias. I know I told you about him. He won't hurt you. Nasias? But Nasias had already relaxed and put his weapon away. He bowed slightly. Betia, it's an honor to meet you. Betia gave a little nod, still watching him warily. However, she let me bring her forward. Are you all right? I asked. I was so worried about you. I will never let anyone hurt you, I swear it. Do you believe me? Her gaze flickered from me to the woods, but she nodded again, leaning against me in a way that betrayed her fatigue. Oh, Liza, she whispered. It was the first word I had ever heard her speak, and I spun her about joyfully and then hugged her tightly to myself, not even releasing her when the white viper spoke again. She came back to us shortly after you left, he said. It was obvious that she regretted leaving you, but she did not want to travel alone through wolf territory to find you. Thank you, I said. Thank you so much. Please, if you need anything before you go on your way. He shook his head. I will be fine. You two. He looked past me at Nasias as if debating whether to finish, and then concluded. You should be together. Do you want to see Wyvern's court? I asked Betia. Or first, how about a hot meal and a place to sleep? She smiled, still holding on to me. Her body felt frail. She obviously had not been eating or sleeping well since she had fled from Velia once again. I'll take care of you, I promised. I looked up, intending to thank the white viper once more, but he was already gone. Unsurprised, I turned to Nasias instead. For tonight, I'm going to take Betia to Wyvern's Nest. It's public enough that you don't have to worry about my safety, and I don't doubt they'll take her in. Tomorrow, I want to speak to the men who attacked Urban, perhaps when they have their meeting with Valine. I can come find you shortly before each before their lesson ends. Would you please let Hai know that I would like to speak to her as well at her earliest convenience? I will let her know. Betia, how does an evening in the dancer's nest sound? She nodded groggily, already half asleep in my arms. I scooped her up to carry her, and she leaned her head against my shoulder. She was so terribly light. Nisias blinked in surprise. Would you like a hand? You need your arms free in case we run into trouble, I said. I can carry her. He shrugged, smiling a little. I'll speak to Hai. You take care of your friend. The three of us reached Wyvern's Nest without trauma. Betia found her feet again as we neared the entrance, though she put her hand in mine as Nisias left us and we stepped inside. We had barely reached the door when we were greeted by a rush of dancers, with Salem at the forefront. Oh, Liza, thank the gods! I was starting to worry I was going to have to give up this life of hedonism and pick up some real responsibilities. He grinned and hugged me tightly. Well, you can relax now. Your future is secure. He stepped back and regarded me with great seriousness before saying, First, I heard that you had abdicated, then that you had been kidnapped. There were rumors that Prentice... Well, they were rumors. There were just as many people up north saying I was responsible, according to Scythe. That's the burden of the second heir. But really... His solemn expression cracked into a smile as he gestured at the malos at my waist. If you were going to go off and elope, you really should have warned someone. I did not abdicate, I said loudly so that everyone could hear me. I did not leave of my own free will, but I have returned safely. I did not mention my inability to shapeshift. I would wait to see whether Hai could work this miracle she had implied was in her power, because I knew that, like Salem, many of them were more curious about the malos than about the state of my health. I added, and I have not yet taken a mate. The malos was given to me by a dear friend of mine who saved my life more than once these past few weeks. I saw skeptical looks, but most seemed to accept that I was telling the truth, especially when I glanced at Betia to make it clear of whom I was speaking. Salem, this is Betia. Betia, this is my cousin Salem. Welcome to Wyvern's Nest, Betia, Salem said. Thank you for bringing our wyvern home. She nodded in greeting, a little wide-eyed as she took in her surroundings. Wyvern's Nest was always filled with warmth, movement, and music, but right then the air was also thick with preparation for the Namirda. The holiday was only days away, and there was no force on earth that would stop serpents from celebrating. Betia jumped as someone else swept in front of us. Urban. Seeing him walking again brought tears to my eyes. Oh, Liza, thank the gods, he whispered, hugging me tightly. When you disappeared, I thought, but you're back now. That's what really matters. It's good to see you up. How have you been? He grimaced, a little stiff, but the doctor assures me I'll get over it. I still take an escort from the wyverns whenever I go into the northern hills, even though the crows who attacked me were caught. Avians are being just as careful over here. He looked thoughtful for a moment. It's odd. There were never a lot of birds around the nest, or out in the market with us in the evening, and we complained about the few who did show up. Now almost all the avians vanish at sunset, and I kind of miss them. He glanced back at someone I couldn't see over the crowd, and added with a half smile, but then I seem to have compensated. Oh, Liza! At the excited cry, Salem, Urban, and the other serpents stepped aside to reveal one of the last people I had expected to see here, Morris. His jaw was darkened by a bruise that couldn't have been more than a day old, and he looked tired, but that wasn't half as shocking as the fact that the big clothes he was wearing had obviously not come from his home. They were serpient clothes, a dancer's clothes, borrowed to cover an avian's more slender frame. He stared at me with as much shock as I felt looking at him. When he realized he was doing so, he started to try to control the reaction, and then shook his head as if recalling that members of the nest were made nervous by avian reserve. Morris, what are you doing here? He finished for me. I seem to have moved in. Urban stepped forward. I know you two will need to catch up when you have some privacy, but first, Liza, Betia, come in. Sit down. Betia hasn't even been introduced to anyone. You both look exhausted and hungry. Baitia, welcome to Wyvern's Nest. My name is Urban. I'm a friend of Eliza's. This is Maris, another friend. You've met Salem. No one else really matters. A few people objected to the quip, but Urban continued, Sit down, sit down. Within moments, half of Wyvern's Nest was sitting or lying somewhere near me, many leaning against me, Baitia, or Urban. The wolf didn't seem to mind the familiarity. Maris had claimed a spot at the edge of the crowd. The serpent seemed reluctant to sit too close to him. I was still just amazed that he was there. The time for questions would come later. For now, bread, wine, fruit, and meat were passed around and shared by every member of the nest. Baitia ate well, and I found that my appetite had also returned. After the meal, the request was made. Come, Baitia, convince your lover to dance for us, someone teased. It isn't fair at all that we taught her, but she'll only let you see. My face felt hot. She's not... Baitia laughed a little, shaking her head. She leaned forward and kissed my cheek as she grabbed my hands and pulled me to my feet. Her brown eyes glittered with a devil-may-care recklessness that warmed me to my toes. If it would make her smile that way, I would dance all night. The dancers and my mischievous wolf companion all but dragged me onto a low dais at the back of the nest. I must have danced half a dozen times, performing a few sakri and then moving on to simple one-scarf melos dances before finally someone called for a harja, specifically Maeve's solo from the Namir Da. Absolutely not, I said, laughing. A melos could be innocent. A harja never was. The intramoral from the Namir Da was representative of Maeve's seduction of Laban. The metaphor was not hard to recognize. There was a sound of disappointment from the audience. Someone else perform, I insisted, sliding off the stage near Baitia. She swung me about in a fairly good mimic of one of the moves I had performed earlier. I thought you were tired, I pointed out. She laughed, but the sound was cut off by a yawn that she tried to stifle, turning it into a little squeak. That's enough, people. You'll dance your princess to death at this rate, one of the elder dancers said. Eliza, Baitia, everyone else, get some sleep. There were some grumbles, but people began relaxing, lying down in twos or more. Someone dragged a blanket over Baitia and me, and several dancers curled against our backs. I remembered how often a serpent nest had been compared to a pile of kittens or puppies, and wondered if the wolves ever slept this way. Baitia seemed just as comfortable with the crowd as she had alone with me. Chapter 19. Lord, I missed my mouth. Despite having danced myself into exhaustion the previous night, I woke early. Loath to disturb Baitia, who was still sleeping deeply, I extracted myself carefully from the pile. Bodies shifted instinctively to compensate for the sudden chill, closing the hole without anyone waking. I found Urban sitting by the fire, munching on bread and cheese. He offered some to me. Morning, Eliza. Beautiful performance last night. Thanks. I'm sorry about what happened before, he said hesitantly. You disappeared, and all I could think was that the last memory I had of you was... He broke off, then blurted out, I'm sorry for pressuring you. I didn't realize... He glanced over his shoulder at Baitia, and I suddenly understood why he believed I had pulled away. Just a friend, Urban, really, I said. He raised one eyebrow. After that little display last night, I've never seen you act that way around a man, Eliza. I blushed. I'm royal blood, Urban. I'm in line to the throne, and a royal pair bond has to produce heirs. Urban cursed, and my mind returned to the argument I'd had with my parents. The dancers would hate any decision that they thought had been made for political reasons instead of love, which meant I couldn't discuss my indecision with any of them, especially Urban. I had walked away from him once, and there would be no undoing that. My gaze drifted to Baitia, who was still sleeping, curled in the arms of a dozen dancers, and from there to a more solitary form. Urban saw who I was looking at. Morris approached me the first time I left the nest a couple weeks ago. Between his objections to my behavior at festival and the fight at Salem's coronation, he felt he shared responsibility for what had happened to me, and then for your leaving. He was in bad shape about it and wanted to make amends, so I invited him back to the nest. And he moved in? It seemed a little extreme. Urban looked down. He came by a few times, but when I went by his house to meet him one day, his parents forbade him to go with me. They argued loudly enough that I could hear it from the next room. His mother kept shouting about how it would look, how he would never be considered a suitable Alistair by any lady who knew he associated with serpents, dancers especially, how their friends would be horrified. I'd never heard avians raise their voices that way. Morris and I left anyway, and when he went back later that day, they wouldn't let him in. That was about a week ago. He's been staying here ever since. I wondered if talking to Morris's parents would help any or only hurt the situation more. They had both been soldiers during the war and were very conservative, as were many of the avians of their generation. Not all of the dancers welcomed him with open arms, Urban said. I think a lot of them still believe he was one of the avians who attacked me. More of them think he's here just to impress you, but Salem and Rosalind have championed him, and no one has the guts to accuse him of assaulting me when I keep saying I trust him. I realized that Morris had done exactly what I had told Nisias my mate must. He had crossed Wyvern's court. He hadn't been accepted by everyone, but here he was anyway, in the dancer's nest. Looks like someone was less forgiving, I commented, recalling the bruise on Morris's cheek. Can I love Morris? I wondered. I looked at my raven suitor and tried to imagine spending every day with him. Tried to imagine someday looking at him the way my parents looked at each other. I knew he was kind and well-spoken. Perhaps he even had the traits he would need to be a king, but even as I tried to let my imagination run wild, I felt no attraction to him. I had never felt the urge to do any of the crazy things that I had seen my peers do in their attempts to impress the ones they loved, such as getting into a dais with professional dancers of the Obsidian Guild, or performing a melos in the nest in defiance of all the potential difficulties, and dancing for hours. Urban grinned, not privy to my thoughts. One of the others made the mistake of harassing Morris while Salem was around. Salem is such a dancer that sometimes it's easy to forget that he's a cobra, but he has a protective streak a mile wide, and when you trigger it, well, he never needed to raise a hand to the other guy. Just stared him down with the kind of cobriana glare that they say used to make opponents in the battlefield drop dead from terror. He shook his head, still looking amused. Once Betia was awake, we left the nest so that I could show myself to the rest of my court before my meetings in the rookery. That early in the morning, the crowd was primarily avian, so our greeting there was much more subdued. The relief in the avian population was apparent in their smiles and in the warmth they allowed into their voices when they welcomed me home, most of them sparing no more than a passing glance for Betia. Wolves in this market were common enough. Serpient tended to have late evenings and late mornings, but there has always been a handful who were early risers. A flautist, who had discovered that, though they did not dance, avians did enjoy music. A baker, who sold spice rolls and meat pies. A weaver, famous for his melos, who had found a morning niche creating more subdued designs that had since become fashionable as cloaks and shawls in the avian court. That day there were so few serpient in the market that I might as well have been in the Hawk's Keep. 2 of my wyverns, a crow and a sparrow, were taking turns circling above to keep an eye on things. I knew they would keep their attention on me as long as I was in the space they were guarding. Their movements were what drew my attention to Arakit, the baker, who had drawn her stall off to the very edge of the market. She smiled tiredly at me. "Oh, Liza, good morning. You are a sight for sore eyes, even though you look as if you've lost a stone of weight since last I saw you." "No matter. We'll fatten you up soon enough," she promised. "And is this the wolf I've heard so much about?" News always traveled fast, none faster than gossip carried by dancers. "Yes, this is Betia. This is Arquit. She has been feeding me every morning I've been home for as long as I can remember." Someone needs to. You eat like a bird. Betia, you're staring longingly at one of my pheasant pies. Go ahead and have one. No one else is eating them. Consider it my thanks for finally convincing our wyvern to dance the Rash Satoth. Where is everyone? I asked as Betia nibbled at the meat pie Arquit had shoved into her hands. She shrugged. Most of them stopped coming out here right after Urban was attacked, and a good thing it was, since there were dozens of fights over the next couple of days. Then about a week ago, Salokeen stepped away from his stall for just a minute and came back to find that someone had ruined weeks' worth of work, she said, referring to the weaver. The rest of the Serpient refused to come out here before noon after that. They all get enough work helping prepare for Namir Da, fortunately. And how have you been? Managing, she said. I refuse to be chased off by a bunch of ruffians causing a ruckus. Saiv comes by most mornings and buys breakfast for herself and speaks highly of me to her associates. So that helps some. Our conversation was cut short by an avian woman who cried out with an uncharacteristic display of relief. "Milady Charday, finally you're back. We all feared we might never see you again." "Princess, how wonderful that you're home," an older avian gentleman said. "At last you can put a stop to this madness." "I'm going to—" "He isn't talking about fights in the marketplace," Arquit interrupted. "I've been listening to him preach since the day you disappeared. He is convinced that those 3 birds they arrested are innocent." "Innocent?" I echoed, staring incredulously at the avian man. "They confessed." "Of course they did," he said. "With an Alistair to the Charday line accused, what good man wouldn't step forward to protect—" Arquit offered, "I would believe they confessed to protect Prentice. I would believe he is guilty. Everyone knows—" "It was an absurd accusation," the avian woman who had greeted me a moment before said. Voices were beginning to rise as everyone tried to talk over everyone else. "It is obscene to think that Lady Saive's Alistair—" "Lady Saive's Alistair," Arquit shouted, "would rather lock his mate up in a golden tower than let her have a life. Prentice only wants to protect her." "Protect her from what? Salem would never let any harm come to her. He watches her like she's his own. The cobra watches her a little too closely for anyone's comfort." I imagined that this group had been having this same argument for more than a month. Certainly nothing would be settled by my adding to it. I hoped I could lay some of this debate to rest after I spoke to the criminals myself. I was just about to announce my intentions when Betia stepped deliberately into the middle of the argument. With feigned obliviousness, she nodded thanks to the serpent for her breakfast. I smiled as I realized that she had positioned herself just right, close enough to the serpent to seem friendly, but far enough from the avians to seem polite by their standards. I took advantage of the moment of peace she had brought to say, "I have plans this morning to speak to the 3 men who were convicted of the assault. If a mistake was made, I will fix it. If indeed they are guilty, I hope you will trust the judgment of your Tuuli Thea and her heir. Now, if you'll excuse me." I understood now how my mother could have feared that a serious punishment would turn criminals into martyrs. I heard similar concerns about Urban's attackers as I continued through the market, as well as questions about my own absence. Repeatedly I assured people that the rumors surrounding my disappearance had been exaggerated, that the culprits would be found, and that the mercenaries would be taken in for questioning as soon as my guards returned with them. Among the avians there was no doubt that a group of guards with wings would succeed in finding a group of lions on the ground. As in the nest, I saw nobody who was afraid or intimidated or angered by my return, at least not visibly. Avians were better at lying with tone and expression than Serpient were, but even so, nothing here felt faked. Betia stayed by my side the whole time, appearing interested in all of the goings-on of the market and never wandering off out of boredom, as I had the same conversation again and again with my subjects. Just as she had accepted the closeness of the nest, she seemed comfortable among avians. I thought of her as a forest spirit, a woman from a world completely different from mine, who could flutter among dancers or merchants as if her feet never needed to touch the ground. No matter where we were, she radiated calmness and acceptance. The wolves had a harder life, yes, but I realized suddenly that they also had a simpler one. They were a people of the seasons, who followed the migratory herds, traded with every culture they encountered, and lived at the whims of fate. The difference between the southern and the northern hills of Wyvern's Court, a dissonance that had been the focal strain of my life, was to her as easy to accept as the changing seasons. I wished that the people of Wyvern's Court could accept each other so easily. The wolf I liked least stepped through the crowd. I saw him just in time to reach back for Betia's hand. Velio's blue eyes widened a little when he saw Betia, and then more when he saw our hands clasped together. Her knuckles were white from gripping my hand so hard, and I could feel her pulse racing where we touched. But she stayed by my side. "Eliza and Betia," Velio greeted us, his tone amused. "Well, this explains a lot." "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm so that we would not attract more attention than we already were. The two avian guards drifted a little closer, keeping an eye on the stranger close to their princess, but they responded to my apparent calm and did not make their presence obvious to Velio. "I heard an interesting rumor," Velio replied, "about you and one of my wolves." "I would love to discuss rumors with you," I said, as I moved past him, keeping my body between him and Betia. "But I have other obligations." "You might want to be careful of the company you keep," Velio warned. I paused, glancing back, even though I knew better. "You're the princess of this land, soon to be queen. You have a reputation to maintain." "My reputation is neither in trouble nor your concern. Now, if you'll excuse us." I felt Betia's grip on my hand loosen as she tried to pull away. "Betia, it's all right. He can't hurt you." Velio chuckled. "Maybe it would be best, Betia, for you to come back with me before you cause trouble for your friend." "She's no trouble," I said, nearly growling. Nearby avians were starting to look concerned, and I struggled to keep my composure. Before Velio could make any more snide comments, Nisias dropped to my side and returned to human form. "Eliza, Veline's lessons should be over in a few minutes. You wanted me to come find you." "Thank you, Nisias." Perfect timing. Finally, I would be able to do something productive. I wanted to put an end to the destructive rumors that I had heard that morning. My mother was a wise woman, and I trusted her judgment. I doubted she would have been fooled by a false confession. Also, as much as I disliked Prentice, I knew that he had enough honor never to have let other avians sacrifice themselves to protect him. "I'll watch out for Betia while you are busy," Velio said. I couldn't bring Betia to the meeting. I needed to be the heir to the Tulithea, not just a woman with a friend. However, I wasn't about to leave Betia with the alpha who had abused her. "Thank you, but that won't be necessary." "Wyvern," Velio said, his voice dropping somewhat. "You are aware that you have no authority over my wolves?" I stepped closer to Velio so that my words would be heard only by him. "She isn't yours anymore. Do you hear me?" "And she's yours?" he hissed. I am trying to look out for you, Wyvern. Even Betia knows she's going to bring you nothing but trouble." "She saved my life," I said. "And she had never done anything to hurt me, and I believed with all my heart that she never would." I couldn't begin to put into words all that Betia had done for me. How could I explain how it felt to have a friend who didn't care that I was Princess Eliza Charday Cobriana? How could I describe the way she had given me courage and helped me find the faith and hope I had lost after Urban had been attacked? There was no way to explain how much it meant to me that she had walked into my world and never cringed from it, that she had drawn me up to dance, challenged me, accepted me. "Your face is as easy to read as hers," Velio sighed. His voice was almost pitying when he said, "You aren't one of my subjects. I don't care what your preferences are. But I know what it is to be a leader. You are the monarch of this land. You are your parents' only child. You need a king, Wyvern." "What does that—" He put a finger against my lips. "You are not just a woman, and your heart is not free to be given away. You need a king, or your parents' bloodline will die. Stop fooling yourself and send her away. Oh, Liza? Nisias touched my arm. We need to go. I nodded woodenly. Stop fooling yourself. To Betia, Nisias suggested, if you don't want to be alone in the market, you can wait with Hai and me in the library. She nodded, her eyes on me. Her resigned expression stayed in my mind as I hurried to my meeting. Well, that interaction got tense. Chapter 20. I had to put the look in Betia's eyes and my reaction to Velio's words from my mind. I couldn't afford to think about it right then. My body tight and my face stony, I stepped into the conference room where Urban's attackers were supposed to be. I was going to need every bit of reserve I had to deal with these three calmly. I had thought that I was prepared, but what I found in the conference room was almost as horrific as the attack itself. One of the men waiting for me couldn't have been more than 16 years old. The oldest, who I assumed from the similarity of their features was the boy's brother, was probably near my age, and the third boy a year younger. I had expected older men, perhaps soldiers, people with memories of war and loved ones lost. These three couldn't ever have seen a battle. Two of them were too young even to have lost a parent or sibling in the war. These were our vicious assailants? A few days before, when Nisias had told me what my mother had sentenced these boys to, I had felt it was too mild. Now, having seen them, I thought about the child who had reached toward Urban at festival, and how her mother had pulled her away. Who was really to blame here? I looked at the youngest boy. He was pale, and though his expression was controlled, his fingers were trembling. What is your name? Shane, milady, he said in a voice so small I could barely hear it. Shane Tenahe. Bryn Tenahe, the eldest said when I looked at him. Unlike his brother, he stood and spoke confidently, as if utterly certain he had done no wrong. Luke Redine. The third boy was soft-spoken, but shared his friend's poise. I heard a rumor on my way here that you each confessed out of the nobleness of your innocent hearts. Looking at you, I almost wish it was true. But I don't think it is. I did come forward because I heard that Lady Sives Alistair had been questioned, Bryn said. I. Had he confessed for himself, or for all three of them? I would never allow my actions to harm the royal house. We would never, Luke said. Would never. I trailed off, thinking of everything that had occurred since Urban had been attacked. All the violence and guards in the marketplace. I imagine none of you were alive during the war. We've all heard about it, Luke said. Have you? I challenged. The stories of forest floors so soaked with blood that the trees began to die, the stories of black smoke from the pyres and the stench of burning bodies so constant that the living stopped even noticing it, the stories of children killed, of so many horrors. We have all heard the stories, but I have never been tempted to relive them. You were the first ones in 20 years to pick up a weapon and nearly kill someone who wasn't even your enemy anymore. I almost dismissed the younger brother as a child, almost as much a victim as Urban, but he was the one who stepped forward to defend their actions. The war never ended, Shane said. His voice wavered a little, but not just from nerves. Some people say it did, but it didn't. The only thing different now is that people turn a blind eye. We used to live in Wyvern's Court, but we had to move back to the Hawk's Keep because our sister grew old enough to draw Serpiant attention, and it did not feel safe for us to stay. Shane? He shook his head when both of the older boys tried to interrupt him. My pair bond still lives here, he continued. I forced myself to reevaluate my first impression. He was young, but avian boys were raised with an intense emphasis on responsibility and the protection of their families and pair bonds. I understand that the Serpient have different customs, but why does that give them the right to abuse her? Why does the fact that it is their way mean I cannot take my lady for a moonlight walk without our being propositioned by strangers? Do you know what that is like? I am her Alistair, and I am told that I must tolerate her constant fear. She is 14, and she cannot walk through the market alone after dusk unmolested. I fear what would happen if she had dared to step onto the southern hills. There is one small area of this court that is unpolluted by Serpient, the northern hills, and I will be grounded before I allow a dancer to skulk about it in the shadows there. Now, if I have spoken too frankly, if I have offended my Lady Chardet, my Lady Cobriana Chardet, Aramis, then I will accept the consequences. I am tired of being silent and accepting. Was this the world we had worked so hard to make? This fury had not been bred by war. It had been created in the cradle of Wyvern's court. I looked at the older boys. I have no pair bond, Luke said, but I too have family and friends and have heard similar complaints. Are you telling me that there have been physical assaults by Serpient in Wyvern's court and the royal family has not responded? There does not need to be physical violence for people to be harmed, Bryn said. In accordance with our Tuulithea's wise sentence, we have been coming here for almost a month now, and we have not ignored everything we have been told. I am aware that most Serpient probably consider their actions casual flirting, that they may have no idea that their friendly jests can ruin reputations, relationships, and lives. They don't understand that the pretty girl they just stole a kiss from, such as my brother's pair bond, has possibly never been kissed, has never had someone grab her that way, and isn't blushing because she is coy, but because she is terrified. They're like real birds of prey snatching mice. Maybe they aren't malicious. Maybe they don't mean any harm. But that doesn't help the mice any. I resisted the impulse to rub my temples. At least I knew they had not confessed falsely. I considered and threw out a dozen possible responses. Finally, I sighed. I understand your grievances. I know that Wyvern's court is still a work in progress, but violence is not the answer. We committed a crime, Bryn said. I know that. Violence might not be an answer, but at least it made people recognize that there was a problem. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. I have another meeting to attend, I said softly. Gentlemen, could they be used to help find... Their meetings with Valine had to help somehow, or nothing. I had no ideas. I'll speak to you again another day. Chapter 21. I drifted from the conference room to the library with my head aching and a heavy feeling in the pit of my stomach. I paused in the doorway to watch Hai, Nisias, and Betia for a moment. Nisias looked amused, and Betia was smiling brightly. Hai was wearing her customary detached expression. Hai noticed me first. She looked up and said, "We were discussing looking into the future." "You were?" "And the ethics of looking into someone else's past or future." She shrugged. Nisias moralizes like a serpent. Betia listens well, though she doesn't talk much. Or at all. I wondered what Betia might have said on the subject, or whether there was more wisdom in remaining silent while the two falcons debated. Betia stood and hugged me in greeting. I leaned against her, desperate for some kind of support. Suddenly a pang went through me. "Stop fooling yourself." "I've never seen you act that way around a man, Eliza," Urban had said. The truth was that I had never even been tempted, just as I had never felt torn about performing the Rashatoth dances because there had never been anyone I wanted to perform for, until that day in Obsidian. I held on to Betia a moment too long. knowing I wouldn't always be able to. I forced myself to focus on the reason we were there. I had to. "Hi, I'm sorry for what I said yesterday," I began. "I have never thought less of you just because you can't fly, and it would be hard for you to think less of me, cousin, since you think very little of me in the first place," she said offhandedly, as if she found the whole subject silly. "I am not a falcon to you. I don't deserve that respect in your mind. And I'm not a cobra either. Not kin to you. Not in your heart." She was right. I didn't know how to think of her. I found it hard to think of her as family. I acknowledged our shared blood mostly out of a sense of responsibility to her, not out of any genuine affection. The way she drifted into and out of a room, often responding to friendly greetings or questions with an expression that conveyed something close to contempt, had alienated me from the first time we had met. "I didn't realize you felt that way. Having recognized my mistakes, I wanted to fix them." "I don't know you well, Hi, but—" "I spoke a fact to you, Wyvern," she interrupted, once again snuffing out what might have been some kind of connection before it could be formed. "It was not a plea for compassion. Were I given the choice, I would be in the White City, not here, and I would call Sharza my queen, not you. But I do not have a choice. You have come to ask me if I really can fix your wings, or if my offer was just the rambling of a slightly delusional mind. There is no need for this false courtesy before you ask me favors. Given how you seem to feel about me, why are you offering to help?" She lifted her cobra eyes skyward. "My loyalty toward the Empress who raised me implies no hatred for you. I do not care what images of me you hold in your head. I will give you back your wings if I can, because I of all people know what it is like to have the sky, your future, your place in life all torn from you by the shifting tides of Anamirak's whims. Now, Wyvern, let us see if I can find your golden feathers." I looked at Nisias, who shrugged as if to say, "Your decision." I stepped closer to Hi, and she moved into the starting position of many serpient dances. I raised my hands and crossed my forearms, mirroring Hi, the backs of our hands just touching. Nisias stood behind Hi, as if prepared either to catch her or to push her out of the way. "You really think you can do this?" I asked Hi. "That, or we could burn down the library." "Excuse me?" She gave me an innocent look. "Don't worry. You don't harm Wyvern's court. Your magic isn't that strong." "Hi, you aren't making any sense." She leaned back against Nisias, closing her eyes. "You have asked me for my help, yet still you doubt? Every moment of every day I touch 1,000 different ashe, 1,000 possible futures. I know that your magic is not strong enough to really burn." "If you know these things, can you tell me who hired the mercenaries?" She looked up at me, her eyes like pools of blood. "Now," she asks. "But no, I cannot see that. The only way I think I can find your wings is by using your control, that overriding control that will forever keep your magic a whisper instead of the whirlwind it could be. Precious control, which I do not have on my own. Relax, Wyvern. This will hurt." I was vaguely aware of Betia's warmth behind me when High's power first reached me, but then that faint contact, as well as any awareness of the library we were in, burned away. If this is what her power feels like, no wonder she is mad. I would have screamed if I could have found my voice, but it was gone, seared away from me. And then I felt High, and the power that was at the heart of this agony. "You burn," she whispered in my mind, and in those words I felt longing and envy and fear all rolled together. Frozen. When I reached for High, her power was like ice. It wrapped around me, seeping deep into my body, contorting muscle and bone. The magic I had inherited from my parents accepted the falcon's magic like an old companion, and they fit together until I could feel my hawk form again. It had been broken and buried in pain, but now I knew I would be able to grow my wings. If this could work for one of us, could it work for the other? I was not the only one there whose wings had been lost, the only one longing for the sky. High? No. I had already reached for her. She recoiled, but it was too late. My magic had welcomed hers, but hers fractured. Another power reached forward, something gentler, frightened but soothing. Nisias. Someone screamed. Maybe me. The sound echoed in my head until it became white noise and then hollow silence. Stillness. Like a feather skimming the surface of a sudden draft, I floated into another world. Chapter 22. The world seemed to pause. The air felt heavy and expectant. When I turned, I was hardly surprised to find myself no longer in the library, but in the woods. There was a stranger before me. Her eyes widened and her hand flew to a dagger at her waist. Suddenly, I knew that this had happened before, in some memory I could not quite reach. The instant I became aware of that, I realized that I was not part of this scene. What was happening now was an echo of the past. Specifically, the moments I had lost after Hai's magic had interacted with mine for the first time. Hai's words echoed in my mind. A sakri isn't neat like a letter. I was never trained. I can't control it. At least I remember mine. Most, without training, cannot. Sakri? Magic. Vision. Sakri ashe. You are about to do something that changes everything. My past self held up her hands in a gesture of harmlessness, and the stranger paused, her blade lowering slightly. You... She looked puzzled and lost. This... Who... I watched as Eliza of the past spoke softly, facing the confused woman. You're in the woods near Wyvern's Court, she said. I am Eliza Chardet Cobriana. Are you a dancer? The woman she was facing raised a hand to touch something at her throat. An anlay, like the one I wore. Exactly like the one I wore. Now I recognized the knife as well. It matched the one my mother had given to me. Not a dancer, the not such a stranger sighed. I understood now, as I had understood then. The sakri, I gasped, just as my past self had. Once again, I was trapped inside the memory. My sakri ashe, meant to distract my mind and calm me, instead had summoned a vision of my future self. Sakri ashe, whispered the vision. She wore the anlay on a soft leather string. She also wore deerskin boots that went to her thighs, gauntlets of hard leather, and a vest that I now realized was armored. Her face was mine, but not the one I saw in the mirror every day. The golden eyes were hard, and her expression was painfully controlled. A ragged scar twisted from her left cheekbone down her jaw to the edge of her throat. A few more inches in the wound probably would have killed her. This was a version of me who had seen war. I had no doubt. The sorrow with which she looked upon Wyvern's Court told me more about her life than I wanted to know. They aren't ready, the vision said softly. There is no answer. She swallowed hard and then explained, I stayed, and when pressured I took a mate. Urban. She smiled a little, but her expression was weak. He was sweet, gentle, you know. And he was dead within a fortnight. Killed at my feet in the marketplace with poison so swift no one saw the source. The riots lasted 3 days. She held out her hand, and tentatively my past and future selves touched fingertips. Vertigo. As time and fate swirled around us, future and past and present scattering and mixing together. Suddenly I was on the green marble of the plaza at Wyvern's Court. Sunrise was painting the hills, but I walked through a silent court. Where were the merchants preparing to sell their wares? Where were the dancers giving thanks in the mist? Where were the children, laughing, running? Someone grabbed me, and I went peacefully. This was a dream. Nothing could be hurt here but my heart and faith. What do you want, feathered stranger? My captor turned to me, and I blinked as I saw the leader of the Obsidian Guild. "Dancer, you aren't welcome here," he said bluntly. Instinctively, I lifted my hand to the onlay at my throat, and he smacked it away. "That's the only thing that keeps me from killing you on sight, Eliza Charday Cobriana." He spat the last two names. "I don't know how you reached our land, but I suggest that you take your wyvern form and fly swiftly and high out of here. Go home to your palace, your forts, and—" Choking back a cry, I violently twisted the world about me, landing on my knees in the same spot, but in another reality. Here, Wyvern's Court was crowded, despite it probably being the middle of the night. There was a festival air that reminded me of the Namir Da, and I sighed in relief, trying to shake off the vision of obsidian. I should have stayed to ask him what had happened, but I had panicked. I would not do it again. Leaving the market, I walked up to the Dancers' Guild, ever the home of gossips. Searching revealed nothing. Wyvern's Nest was gone in this future. Scanning the market from the distance, I realized that there was not a single dais. I lifted my eyes and saw crows and ravens circling above me, their pattern precise. Guards. I returned to the market, letting my dream self twist so that I ceased to be Eliza Charday Cobriana and was instead perceived as a friendly stranger. "What happened here?" I asked the first passerby I could find. The woman looked at me as if I had lost my mind, and I clarified my question. "I have been away a long time, but when I was here last, there were dancers." "Oh, well," the woman said, "the dancers all left years ago." Left implied they had gone peacefully. "Why?" I asked. "There was a lot of trouble for them," the woman explained. "This wasn't really their place anyway." Wyvern's Court was— "Hush, girl, no one uses that name anymore." The avian shook her head. "No, the dancers knew they weren't wanted even before Eliza decided—" She cleared her throat. "Before Eliza decided to do the right thing." "Which was?" I asked. "Where have you been, child? Why, she finally picked an Alastair. The dancers just got up and left." Someone behind me spoke up. "Don't let her fool you," the young man said. "The dancers didn't leave. I was part of the crew that took the bodies out of the nest." He swallowed hard. Someone got it into their heads that Eliza preferred avians, and that they could get away with it. And they did. They say Eliza killed herself, though I don't believe it. I'm more likely to say Prentice killed her. "Prentice? Sives Alastair?" "Don't go spreading filthy rumors like that," the woman said. "Someone killed her," a third person said. "I myself wouldn't accuse the Tuolitheus Alastair, but someone did it. The wyvern wasn't the sort to take her own life." I was relieved to hear it. My position in this reality shifted, and I was not surprised to see Sive, sitting in the Rookery's conference hall, a queen upon her throne. Where was the young girl I had known? This woman was beautiful, in a cold sort of way, her skin as pale and flawless as alabaster, and her golden eyes fierce. "Well," she demanded of the three avians who stood before her, Prentice included. "Milady, the reports were true," her Alastair informed her. Sive looked away for a moment. I knew I shouldn't have let her go into those lands, but she had so much faith, and she loved him so much. She shook her head. Why didn't I stop her? What kind of promise is love, to keep a hawk safe? She cried out in a shocking loss of control for a hawk. "Milady, I'm sorry," Sive said softly. "It has been a very long day. I had prayed that the rumors weren't true. Danica was almost a second mother to me." My mother? They were talking about my mother. What had happened? "How is my own mother today?" Sive asked. I could see that she was bracing herself for the answer. "Nicola is not well, milady," Prentice replied. "The poison—" Again, I pulled myself away, thinking, find me a time when there is peace. Please, any god or goddess that exists, find me a time when I find love, when I take a mate, and it does not lead to war. Wyvern's Court was gone. No wreckage remained. Instead, the buildings that stood there glittered with what could only be falcon magic. I shivered. A small child ran past me. her long chestnut hair trailing behind her. She laughed and turned. Her eyes were as golden as my own. I saw one of the men from the Obsidian Guild, the Burmese python I had danced with once, following close at her heels. He picked her up and spun her around and then paused when he saw me. "Is she yours?" I asked. "Yes," he answered warily. "Can I help you?" "Where is her mother?" "Ooh," the girl struggled to get down. "I want to chase the butterflies." He sighed. "Kei, there are no butterflies." "But," she started to cry. Great big tears trickled down her face. "I want to chase the butterflies." My eyes widened, and he looked at me with a guarded expression. "Not many people come here," he said. "Did Hai send you?" "Hai?" I asked blankly. He frowned. "You probably shouldn't be here." "Daddy, let me down!" The girl managed to get free, and she continued running. He hurried to catch up with her and scooped her up in his arms. "She's a handful, I take it." He shook his head. "You really aren't from here, are you?" "No," I answered. This time he seemed to look closely at me. He frowned and said, "You seem familiar, but I can't place you." He tensed, holding the girl closer. "You aren't from Anmeek." "The falcons come here often?" "Look around you," he answered. "I'm sorry. I have not been here in a long time. The last time I stood in this spot, Oliza was the heir to the throne." "No, I'm sorry," he answered. "If you are looking for Oliza," he turned away, his breath hitching. "Daddy, do you see the rainbow?" "There is no rainbow, honey." "Daddy, there is no rainbow," he said, too sharply. Then he fell to his knees, cradling the girl. Tears stung my eyes. What kind of future was this? This was my child, I could feel it, and surely this was the mate I had chosen. But where was everyone else? Where was Wyvern's court? What was wrong with the girl? "Mommy!" the girl shouted, pulling away from her father. She ran to me. "Not Mommy," her father answered. Looking at me, he said, "I'm sorry, you never told us your name." "Mommy!" the girl called again. "Mommy! Mommy!" She was crying now, and I could not help going to my knees and putting my arms around her. "Please don't encourage her," the man said. "Kei has a poor grasp on reality. These walls keep her physically safe from her magic, but her mind has never been as safe. Please, Kei, come here." "Where is everyone else?" I asked over the girl's head. "The rest of Wyvern's court." He shook his head. "There is no rest of Wyvern's court. I'm sorry to have to be the one to tell you. We were warned that Kei would be born with magic. We were warned that it wouldn't be stable. We tried, and Nisias and Darian tried everything, but her magic was too powerful. We had no way to control her and no way to teach her. I know that Oliza wouldn't begrudge her daughter for what she did as an infant, but I think it's probably best that Kei's mind will never grow beyond what it is." My breath was coming in ragged gasps. This was the world with peace? Was anyone alive? What of Saiv? Salem? He shook his head. The falcons came. Why, my throat closed around sobs when I tried to speak. "Why am I alive?" he asked. "Because someone needed to care for her. Because the falcons wouldn't kill a child. Just lock her in this magical prison where she chases butterflies and sees phantoms of all the people who once lived on this ground. Hai and Nisias help. So do the rest of Obsidian, as many as Araceli allowed to live. The other Serpient and Avian children were taken back to the palace and the Hawk's Keep. I suppose the falcons are raising them." "Dear Sky," I prayed, "is this my future?" His eyes widened. "Who are you?" "I'm the past," I answered. For myself more than him, I said, "And I have no daughter. This prison doesn't exist, and Wyvern's court does." "Sakri," he whispered. "Oliza?" I nodded. He stepped toward me, hand outstretched, and then jerked away. "If none of this exists, then I pray you won't let it. Ever." Do we even know each other in your world?" "We met," I answered. "I was running from mercenaries. We danced together. That's all." "I remember that day," he sighed. "Better if that is all." I looked at the daughter I would never have and held back tears. When I leave, all this will vanish. She will vanish, and she will never exist. "And only you will know she could have," he answered. Gods, why? Why do this to me? If this was what the falcons feared, the reason Nisias believed that they would kill my child if she was born with magic, then this was a possibility with any man that I might choose as my mate. Did she kill me? He nodded. I pulled away from the vision, letting it dissolve, and ended up on my hands and knees, choking on tears. That was a roller coaster ride. Chapter 23. When the visions faded, Betia's arms were around me and I wept. The wings of my demi-form cascaded down my back, and I had wanted them so much, but now they were less important. I wanted both to remember and to forget everything I had just seen. I wanted never to have known. I understood then more than I ever wanted to. I remembered pulling from the trance after Urban was hurt and struggling to act even as the visions continued to barrage me, slipping me from the present to the past, so that I spoke and acted in a haze that I later recalled only in my nightmares. I struggled now to keep my resolve as the memories frayed like dreams. "Are you all right, Eliza?" Nisias asked, kneeling next to us. "Kei." I tried to hold her face in my mind. "Hope?" Hai asked, from where she was leaning against the wall. Her skin was flushed, and I could see the sheen of sweat on her brow. Hope. That was what the name meant in the old language. But Kei didn't exist. "Please, leave me alone for a moment," I asked of Hai and Nisias. "Thank you for helping. Thank you. But I need time to think." Nisias nodded and said, "I will be right outside if you need me." With one last concerned look back at me, he escorted Hai out. I was certain that he had not seen the devastating visions I had seen. I did not know if Hai had. Betia met my gaze questioningly, and I held her more tightly. I did not want to be alone, not truly, and I couldn't send her away, not when she had been gone in every world I had come across. "Where were you?" I whispered. "Did I chase you away when I became queen, Betia? I must have. So much death. Where were you?" I sobbed, looking away. "I had a daughter, and she was mad, and I couldn't say the rest. Betia lifted my face and brushed the tears from my cheek. Her voice was hoarse from the long months of disuse as she asked, "Were you in love?" The question, the first sentence she had spoken, made a lump lodge in my throat. Betia kissed my forehead. "I won't leave you unless you ask me to. Her lips touched mine chastely. "The future will come. I will be there, if you want me." She kissed me again so sweetly that I could not help crying harder. Her lips were warm, her body was soft against mine. "You don't have to speak. Words fade," she whispered. "I know that better than anyone. Words are forgotten. They are regretted. Unnecessary. I know." So in silence we held each other until my trembling subsided, and when she kissed me once more I gave in to the temptation and I kissed her back. With her presence and her touch she gave me the hope and the warmth that I needed so much. "I don't care what your preferences are, but I know what it is to be a leader. You are the monarch of this land. You are your parents' only child. You need a king, Wyvern." I pulled away from Betia as reality began crashing down around me, as I suddenly remembered why she had not been in the future. "Find me a time when I find love, when I take a mate and it does not lead to war. I found love, and I took a mate. They just weren't the same person. I looked at Betia and saw the hurt in her eyes. Betia, I can't. We can't be together, not while I'm queen, not while... A vision of Kei came to mind, and again the words echoed in my mind. And a royal pair bond has to produce heirs. Eliza? Nasias had entered the room and was standing beside me. Nasias, please. Eliza, I'm sorry, but a group of our guards just brought the mercenaries in. The lions. I needed to talk to them. I want to chase the butterflies. Again, I struggled to keep the dream in focus, but I also wanted more than anything to forget it, to curl in Betia's arms and pretend that the future was easy. I need to talk to the mercenaries, I said. Betia nodded, her expression resigned. I couldn't help it. I kissed her again, tasting her lips and drawing strength from her embrace for what I needed to do. I didn't care what Nasias thought. The lions hunted sometimes with us, Betia said. They only do their jobs. Don't hurt them. I smiled, moved by her protectiveness. The lions had no formal kingdom and had always been at the mercy of the laws of the lands that they visited. The punishment for treason was severe in both courts, but in this case, I could promise I won't hurt them. Needing her support, I asked, "Would you come with me to speak to them?" She hesitated, but then she gripped my hand and helped me stand. Chapter 24. I see Skip Bryant join the group. Hello. Tavison and 9 of his people were waiting in the rookery courtyard, surrounded by my wyverns and additional members of the Serpient and Avian guards. It was the place where I had first met him. It was also the place where I had woken up after the unintended Sakri. Let me through, I told my guards as they tried to keep me from getting too close to the lion's leader. Too many people were there. Nasias, I want to speak to Tavison alone. Eliza, now! His eyes widened at the command, but nevertheless he escorted Tavison from the mass of soldiers to the far edge of the rookery where, if we kept our voices down, we would not be overheard. Betia hesitated and then, at my gesture, followed us. Betia Frektain, an honor as always. Eliza Chardet Cobriana, I hope you take no offense if I say I had not hoped to see you again. His voice was soft and his body seemed tired. Nasias had given us some room, but he didn't move so far back that he could not intercede if Tavison tried anything. I didn't have time to argue with him. Voices were echoing in my head, and I grasped at them, needing to remember. The dancers didn't leave. I was part of the crew that took the bodies out of the nest. Tavison took a deep breath. I know what you are about to ask, milady, but I cannot tell you the name of my employer. I was instructed not to tell anyone, my own people included, unless my refusal to speak put me in danger. You don't think you're in danger here? Nasias demanded. You abducted our queen. For a reason I do not comprehend, she is willing to show you lenience. I think it would be in your best interest to answer her. Tavison, I need your help. Milady, what is wrong? I finally understood the argument that had echoed in my mind frequently since Hai's magic had first triggered mine, and I had spun the Sakri Ashe. Oh, Liza, this is madness. There has to be another way. Almost 2 months before, I had woken from these visions the same way I had this time, desperate to protect the future from the horrors I had seen. I had gone to the only person I knew who might be able to help me do what Hai had warned me I would. Change everything. There was no time to be subtle. I hired you. What? Nasias asked in shock, but I ignored him. No time. I know it's the truth. I remember now. More important, I remembered why. I couldn't let the horrors I had seen become reality, and there was one thing they had all in common. The one thing I had begged Tavison to help me remove. Tavison hesitated, but then nodded. You told me that you needed to leave Wyvern's Court, but that you feared you would soon lose the knowledge of why. You were the one who ordered me to strip your winged forms, so that you would not be able to return easily." His gaze dropped. "We did not anticipate that the Frectane, whom we have worked with before, would be a problem." "I want to chase the butterflies." "Nisias, release them. All of them. I need to go." "I want to chase the butterflies." I grasped at the memory but couldn't quite find it. Why did those words bring an ache to my chest? "I want to chase the butterflies." I kissed Betia's cheek and whispered, "I will meet you in the nest. There is something I must do now. I love you." I needed speed. I needed my wings. I shifted into my wyvern form, nearly shrieking with the relief of finally unfurling my wings again. I would have loved to take to the skies and soar, but in that moment I had other things to do. I whipped out the doorway past Nisias, who I knew would follow me as soon as he had changed into his own form for flight. Sive let out a little gasp as I landed inches in front of her, finding my human form again. I had stopped and shifted so swiftly that she had to grab my arm to steady me. She was alone, luckily. I did not want Prentice as an audience just yet. I swallowed thickly. Could I really do this? I asked, "Could you do it, Sive? I've heard how highly your people speak of you, and I know that you would treat them well. You think swiftly and are as polished as any hawk ever was. Could you rule if you had to?" She froze. "Oh, Liza, are you all right?" "Never mind me," I answered. I couldn't think about myself right then. I couldn't think about how I had always expected to one day be their queen. All my life I had considered Wyvern's court mine. Mine to protect before anything else. Both of our mothers are still alive. You would not need to take a throne immediately or even soon. I assume you would inherit it when an avian queen traditionally does, when you have your own child years from now. Would you do it? She nodded slowly. "If I had to, Eliza, but you are the Wyvern of Wyvern's court. I could never replace you." "I'm not asking you to replace me." I found Salem in the market. This time I landed a little ways back. The cobra was engaged in lively banter with a pair of merchants, both of whom were looking rueful but honored by his presence. He stepped back from them with a self-satisfied nod and quickly noticed me. "Good morning, cousin." The light-hearted sparkle in his eyes almost made me forget my purpose, almost made me remember simpler times. The burden I was about to put on him. "What would you have done if I had never returned to Wyvern's court?" He frowned. "You don't think I believed that nonsense about your abdicating, do you?" "No, I don't," I said. "I'm just asking what if. If I was gone, what would you do?" Slowly, now visibly worried, he answered, "I'm no Wyvern." "I'm not asking you to be," I said. "Could you be Arami for the Serpient? Lead this generation in peace, so that maybe in the future—" My voice was wavering. Salem began to pace, his garnet eyes flashing. "Eliza, you will be a good queen. No one cares more about Wyvern's court than you do. And if I rule them, it will destroy them," I said. "I would be their queen if they would allow me, if fate would allow me, but my first duty as their leader is to keep them safe. Could you do it?" He sighed heavily, running his hands through his hair. "They like me, Eliza, if that's what you're asking. If anything ever happened to you, they would accept me as Arami, as Dient. But Eliza—" I didn't wait for him to protest any more. I returned once again to Wyvern's Nest. I kissed the doorway, knowing that I would probably rarely see it in the future. I could not be in Wyvern's court without usurping power from Sive and Salem. I wouldn't be able to stand it. There could be no indecision. I was trembling as I walked into the nest because I knew that I could not change my decision no matter what answer I received there. I could not keep Wyvern's court or my place as its princess. I could not keep any of the things I had assumed would always be mine. I could only pray that there was something, someone, I loved that fate would not rip from me. Betia greeted me hesitantly. I caught her hands and pulled her to me. I sensed her concern and support for me, and they calmed my nerves as I kissed her. I remembered those simple words she had spoken when she had promised never to leave unless I asked her to. And then I went down on one knee. I don't know what kind of life we might have together, I said, never looking away from her warm brown eyes. But I know I would protect you with the last scrap of my soul. I know I want to be there for you, to hold you, to dance for you, to hunt with you, to be with you no matter where fate takes us, because it's the sound of your heartbeat that comforts me when I drift off to sleep. And I know I cannot offer you royalty. I'm not sure what I can offer you but myself. Hopefully that is enough, because I love you, Betia, and I do implore you to be my mate. Tears gathered in her eyes, and my stomach twisted, and my heart pounded in panic. I had to give up Wyvern's Court. The decision was made and set in stone, no matter what happened. She knelt in front of me and squeezed my hand gently. Wolves mate for life, she said softly. I smiled and said, so do wyverns. I love you, she whispered. She shook her head and said again, words fade so easily. Her lips touched mine, and she held me as if she would never let go, not even when her fingers found the feathers at my nape, or the sparks of red and gold in my hair. She had not pulled away from me in the closeness of the nest or objected to the calmness of the avian market. She knew every side of me, had listened to all my dreams, and had never rejected any part of me. She didn't have to say the words aloud. Someone behind us whistled, which made us both recall at the same time that the nest was rarely empty. Even though I had paid it no mind when I had entered, there was a crowd watching us. Betia laughed. I'm going to need to talk to them, I said apologetically. She nodded, not quite giving me up yet. She slid her hands down my arms to twine her fingers with mine again. Betia, you're the one who has been with me this entire time. You know what I'm about to do? She nodded. Speak to your people. I will wait for you. Suddenly panicking again, I gripped her hands. Am I doing the right thing? It kills me to give them up, but I really think this is the only way. I know what people will say. They'll accuse me of being afraid. Am I just a selfish coward giving up because it's getting hard? Selfish coward? She repeated with some confusion. From the first time I met you, you have spoken of Wyvern's Court with love and pride and a sense of home that I envy. You have spoken of yourself as belonging to them. Wyvern's Court is your world. It is you. She shook her head. Words. I just know that it can't be selfish or cowardly to give up everything you ever thought you were in order to protect them. We kissed again, quickly, and then looked up at the dancers, who had backed off enough to give us privacy. Urban took my glance as an invitation to step forward. His limp was a dagger to my heart, but it reinforced my determination. I'm sorry, was the first thing he said. Only then did I realize that much of the nest must have been seen the pained look on my face, in addition to the interlude with Betia. I know we teased you two a little, but I don't think anyone really thought. He looked stricken as his gaze fell to Betia, and I realized he was apologizing to her. Turning back to me, he said, I take it this means you've made your decision? I struggled to come up with an answer as he shook his head and said gently, I can recognize a goodbye when I see one, Wyvern. He thought I was saying goodbye to Betia and preparing to declare a mate. That was what the apology was for. Wyvern's Court taking me from her. If only he knew how much I was really going to say goodbye to. Would you help gather the serpent in the market? I asked him. I need to make an announcement. He nodded. I'll tell the others, and I'll bring Morris. Thank you. I separated grudgingly from Betia. I'll meet you there? She nodded, and again I found my wyvern form. I stopped briefly to inform Nisias that I needed to address my people, and I asked him to gather the avians. Then I sought my parents. A courier, whose eyes were wide as he beheld my rumpled hair and harried expression, hurried to fetch them once I reached the rookery. Oh, Liza, My mother sounded worried as she and my father came into the room. My father took one glance at me and then poorly suppressed a smile as he came to the obvious conclusion. He cleared his throat. "I've made my decision," I told them. "I need to address our people. I'd like to do so from the market, unless you have another idea." My parents looked at each other. "Do we get to know the outcome, or shall we also wait?" my father asked, his smile suddenly a little more strained. I hesitated. I wanted to tell them, but was worried that they would try to talk me out of my decision. The images from the Sacri had already faded to a point where the strongest thing I remembered was the sense of absolute desperation. I remembered what I had thought of them, remembered that I had seen the devastation caused by every choice I made, but the specifics, the faces, they were disappearing. I was happy to lose the details. They had hurt too much. I was also happy that, unlike last time, I was not losing time, perhaps because Nisias had been there to balance the vision and cut it off cleanly at the end. "I will speak to you along with our people as soon as they have gathered, which, hopefully, they are already doing, if you're willing to wait." They both looked worried now. I remembered the stories I had heard of the last such announcement, when my parents had told their respective people of their choices, to get married and unite the Avians and the Serpient. Many people had been horrified. But in the end, the war had stopped. "We can wait," my mother said, and I knew that it had taken all her avian poise to say that. She grasped my father's hand. "As long as you are certain, I am." We're in the home stretch, guys. Chapter 25. Yes. Within the hour, I stood on a dais at the center of the market, near the glittering wyvern statue. I took a deep breath, seeking strength. My eyes fell to the small group immediately in front of me. My parents, my mother's mother, Salem, Rosalind, Sive, Prentice, Nisias, his parents, Andreas and Kel, and of course, Betia. Hai was conspicuously absent. "You are about to do something that changes everything." Her words had begun all this, and now I wondered if she had known that it would lead to this moment. What had she wanted? Had she spoken as a cobra, protecting Wyvern's court, or as a falcon? What I needed to do remained the same either way. Behind my family and all around the dais was a seething mass of curious avians and serpient, who had all hushed the instant I had landed and taken human form. In the sudden silence, I could feel my heart pounding and hear my blood rushing. 21 years. I sighed and then cleared my throat before beginning again. 21 years ago, in the Shah Mehay dancer's nest, the dream that would become Wyvern's court began. My voice carried this time, ringing through the market. The dream was inspired by a symbol, and by the word, Alistair, protector. It spoke of a beautiful world, a peaceful world, one in which Serpient and Avians lived side by side long ago. More important, it spoke of another world in which they would do so again. I look into this crowd today and see vipers and sparrows, taipans and crows, and all these faces prove how far we have come. At that moment, I saw Morris at the periphery of the crowd. He was staring longingly at his parents, who were standing farther off. Simultaneously, they prove how much farther we still have to go. My people were watching me, their faces curious and excited. I knew that what I was about to say would change those expressions. I've been a fool. Those who had been silent and attentive began to shift and grumble as they sensed that this announcement was not about to go the way they had expected. We dreamed of a world in which these two kingdoms would become one, but that's all it was, a dream, ruled by the logic of dreams. I love the southern hills of Wyvern's Court. I love their dance. I love their laughter, their comfort, their expression. I love their passion. I continued with just as much sincerity. And I love the northern hills. I love the rhythm of the skies. I love the debates, the music. I love the simplicity and the beauty of shy romance. I love this entire world. I love these two worlds. And that is what they are. Nearly 2 months ago, a young man, a dear friend of mine, was severely beaten for daring to cross the market from his world to the northern hills. More recently, another friend lost his home, his family, for trying to do the same. Every day in the market reveals the segregation and the prejudice that we have almost come to take for granted. We say, that's their way, not ours, and we walk away ignorant. Or worse, we say, well, at least we aren't at war, when we are killing each other with fear and hatred. We ignore the slander because it at least isn't blades. We ignore the pain because, thank the sky, it isn't blood. I fought the urge to pace on my dais. People in the crowd were averting their gazes as they recalled their own actions. Only Nasias kept his eyes on me. Maris's parents noticed him in that moment, but when Maris took a step forward, his mother turned her back on him. I am all of you, avian and serpient. I have for all my life wondered how, beyond my very existence, I can prove to you that we can live together. In my parents' time, the mission was to stop the bloodshed, but in mine, my goal has always been to stop the hatred, and I have never known how. I paused to gather my thoughts, drawing air into my lungs, which felt constricted. Betia smiled up at me, her eyes holding absolute trust. These two worlds are different, so different that I do not know if they can ever be made one. I cannot say that one set of values is superior. I cannot say that a child should be raised one way or another. I cannot destroy one culture to assure that there is no strife. I should not, and I will not. So all I can do is give you to yourselves and let you live side by side, each generation trusting a little more. I saw confusion in my people. My mother was gripping my father's hand so tightly that her knuckles were white. I would be your queen if you would allow me. I would be honored to lead you, but now I do what I must. What do you want from me? I had demanded of them once. I had prayed to the fates for guidance time and again, screaming to them, how can I give peace when they do not want it? My generation has tasted peace, and I have faith that they will safeguard it. And I have faith that someday, when the past is further behind us and fear and hatred have been supplemented by understanding, the time will come when a wyvern can grace your palace. But that hour is not now. It was time to change everything. We have tried to marry two worlds, but one cannot perform a marriage while both parties hold knives to each other's throats. One cannot sew two pieces of cloth together while both unravel. Let us heal. Let the land know peace. I stared at the faces around me and I announced, as of this moment, I formally renounce my claim to both thrones, avian and serpient. I tried to avoid looking at my mother, but I could still see her sway and then lean against my father's tense form. I name Irene Cobriana's son, Salem, Arami, next to be Dient of the Serpient. I held out my hand to the cobra, and he stepped onto the dais, face composed so that his people would not be troubled. I knew that he would have liked to argue with me, to shout and rail against my decision. He hid his emotions from the rest of his people, comforting them, his first sacrifice of self for the throne he had never expected to hold. It would not be the last. This title I gave him was no gift. He said softly, for my ears alone, "They need you, Eliza." I shook my head, but like him, I could not let our people see me breaking inside. I've given them what I can. It's up to you now. Turning to the crowd, I continued, and Sive Chardet, my mother's sister, shall rise as Tulithea of the Avians. She nodded as Salem helped her onto the dais. She was externally composed as we were, as if we had planned this months before, and neither dissented. We needed to be in agreement in front of our people. They both knew that. I share blood with both of them, I concluded. I am living proof that we can live without hatred. So I give you to yourselves, and ask that you remember and each teach your children, and they teach their children. Learn, trust, I would have given them everything, all of me, all I had and all I was. Instead, all I could give them was my faith and desperate hope that they would just try. The future, my people, the future is all we have. I stepped down from the dais, leaving Salem and Sive to address their people. My mother and father instantly came to my side. They both looked as if they wanted to speak, but neither did at first. It was the only choice, I said. My mother swallowed hard. Eliza, I know how hard leadership can be, and how impossible the future seems sometimes, but staying would have been easier. It's leaving them that will break my heart, but it would have been selfish to keep them. I can't give them what they need. Please, trust me. I drew a breath and added, and even if you can't, our people are going to be scared. I know that. They need to see that you believe in them. Sive and Salem are going to need your support, so please, don't fight me. It's done. But what are you going to do? My mother asked. There were tears in her eyes. I'm going to leave for a while, so Sive and Salem can show Wyvern's Court that it can survive and prosper without me. I'll be with friends. I thought of the Obsidian Guild as I said it. They would take me in. And I'll be with my mate. Betia had pushed through the crowd to reach me as my parents and I spoke, and now she took my hand. My mother closed her eyes a moment, speechless. Finally, my father sighed. Eliza, this isn't necessary. If you aren't ready, then... I winced and said, if you are referring to my leaving, it is necessary. I know that you may never understand it, but please trust me. I am the daughter you raised, and I am doing what I must for the sake of our people. He started to argue, but I continued, and if you are referring to Betia, you should be careful. I know you are upset and shocked, but I love her. I won't have you treat her like she's some kind of excuse. My mother broke out of her paralysis. That isn't who we... Eliza, are you certain? More certain than I have ever been about anything. She started to speak again, but then hugged me instead. She looked at Betia and said to me, we love you, Eliza, and we trust you. Good luck. My father nodded and seemed resigned when he said, treat her well, Wolf. Betia and I walked through the market toward the edge of town in silence. I was barely aware of Salem, who spoke behind me to a crowd that was growing more and more restless, or of my people as they moved aside to let me pass. Some of them called my name, but I had to shake my head and keep walking. I saw several of my wyverns. Mine no longer, but performing one last duty, lining up to try to hold back the avians and serpents who were trying to follow me. Suddenly, Morris and Urban stood before me, side by side, as if they had planned this final vision of the world of which we had all once dreamed. Morris started to speak, stopped, and then drew a deep breath as if to compose himself. Urban said, Eliza, I know we aren't perfect, but don't give up on us. We can still... I touched his face, silencing him before he made me cry. I have all the faith in the world in you, both of you, all of you. If I was needed, I would never leave. If ever I am needed, I won't be far. I'm not abandoning you, just letting you spread your wings. Urban smiled wryly. But I don't have wings. I do, Morris offered, voice slightly choked. He gave up on the idea of reserve and hugged me. "We'll make you proud," he whispered. "Take care of yourself." Then it was Urban's turn. He kissed me on the cheek and smiled at Betia. "Take care of her, Betia. She's precious to us." There was one last person I needed to speak to. Nisias caught up with us just before the wood's edge. For a moment, we regarded each other in silence. "I understand," he said at last quietly. "I hate it, but I understand. You may be the only person in Wyvern's Court who really does. People are going to be angry, hurt. I know. I wish it wasn't so, but there's no other way," he finished for me. "I don't know all of what you've seen, but I've seen enough myself to understand. We'll manage, don't worry about us." He added, "And I'll feel better knowing that you and your mate are taking care of each other." Tucked against Betia's side, I said, "I thank you for that too. My parents were a little shocked." "Your parents," Nisias said, "haven't heard the way you've talked about her. They haven't seen the way you look at her. I think I knew before you did." "She was a little slow," Betia said, teasing. I started to defend myself, and then just kissed her instead. She was right. Betia led once we were in the woods. I knew she would find our destination without difficulty. This was, after all, her realm of expertise. I was not surprised when Velio intercepted us. With an arrogant smirk, he said, "I listened to your little speech. Quite heartwarming. It's nice to see that you can justify walking away from them to be with your fling." I went rigid. This time, Betia came to my defense. "He will never understand," she said. "He doesn't know what it means to sacrifice to protect your people." Velio's eyes were blue flames as he turned on her, clearly as furious as if she had struck him. "Do not speak to me about leadership. You turned down my offer when I would have made you queen of the Frectane. Is this what it takes to win your hand? A queen abandoning her throne? I should have had the pack hunt you down before—" My fist met his jaw, hard enough to send him stumbling backward. "Don't you ever threaten her," I snarled. "In fact, I think it would be best if you just left us alone." He regained his balance, his hand going to his face. "Abdication means I'm free to make my own choices for myself," I pointed out. "It means my word isn't that of my courts. It's simply mine. Tempt me, and I'll dance this dance with you." "So you're proposing what? To kill me?" Velio asked. "You won your place as princess by birth, Wyvern, and you weren't strong enough to hold it. I won my right to rule through blood and my own strength. You have no chance of winning, but you want to try to challenge me for one of my own people?" Fury rippled through me, and I leaned toward him. With lips only an inch from his throat, I whispered, "You should know, Velio, that a cobra's bite while you sleep will kill you before you can wake." He jumped back from me, and I smiled, betraying a cobra's fangs. My eyes, normally a hawk's gold, had become a sea of blood marked only with slit pupils. He was caught in a gaze like a baby bird, like prey. And I added, "And Velio? Everyone sleeps sometimes." Betia growled, on the verge of shifting into a more deadly form. Velio looked back and forth between us, not quite managing to hide his fear. Finally, he stepped back. "She's yours, Wyvern. Seems you two deserve each other." He shifted shape and loped his way in his wolf form, with his fur bristling and his tail down. I turned to Betia and pulled her into my arms. "Thank you," I whispered. But Velio's words still bothered me. How many people thought I had abandoned all of Wyvern's Court just to follow my heart? It was a beautiful, romantic idea, but leadership left no such luxury. How could Betia respect me, respect us, if she thought— She shook her head. I would have said no. "What?" "If you had wanted me despite what you needed to do," she said, "I would have said no. I am too Frectane." She grimaced as she said it. to love someone who would betray her duty. You are too Charde Cobriana to love someone who would ask you to. And I love you, so ignore Velio. Wise words. Very wise words. We returned to the Obsidian Guild, who took us in as friends and dancers without asking questions that I suspected they would quickly learn the answers to anyway. In the abandon of the evening, I performed blade dances and melos. After a long, lingering look at my mate, I performed the sensual harja for the first time. I danced sakri of thanks and love and passion and freedom. Betia shared myths and stories from her people and taught us songs she said were often sung in the cold nights. Her voice was a husky alto and blended with mine very well. When pressed, I shared some of the songs and stories of my mother's people, which the Obsidian Guild had never heard. As the dawn neared, I curled against my mate's side, listening to her heartbeat and enjoying her warmth. Sleepily, we murmured of the future to each other. I did not know what the next days would hold, for me or for my world. The next night would be Namir Da, and the serpents would dance as they always had and they always would. Avian parents would whisper to each other about scandal in the knowing way that elders had. Meanwhile, their children would sneak out to watch the rituals with wide eyes and fascinated minds. I had to trust Salem, Sive, and my parents to take care of Wyvern's Court. I had to trust Wyvern's Court to let them. I had not left them an easy path, but at least now they had one. Toth Savinirak, Safnirak Toth. Sacrifice of love. Sacrifice for love. Fate is gentle and harsh. She gives and she takes. Ale anle. And with, oh my god, we read for almost 2 hours. Holy cow. Whew. So we did it, guys. We did it. We finished Wolfcry. So, thank you so much for joining me this evening. I know this was a very, very long read. Probably the longest one to date so far. That means next week we start the 5th and final book of the series. Wyvernhale, I believe is the name of the book. So yeah, my voice is tired, my eyeballs are tired. I am going to bed. Thank you so much for joining me. I cannot wait to see you guys next week. As always, keep yourself safe, stay hydrated, and I will see you next week. Same time, Monday from 8 to 9, maybe. We'll see.